Hello and welcome to this tutorial, second part for making 3D nameplates, where we're going to look at now our UV unwrapping. This basically gives the information for the software package that says which part of the model will have which part of the texture applied to it. So all these little faces, and it all gets defined with the UV unwrap. So switch to solid mode. And now in our UV pane, what we're going to do is expand this up a bit so we can see a bit better in there. And we're going to create a new image for our trial nameplate, which I'm going to call trial plate. And I'm going to make this 2048 pixels wide by 4096 pixels high, 32-bit float, and click OK. And there you can see our blank texture. So now we need to switch to edit mode, and as you can see we've got everything selected, and then choose trial plate texture, and that shows that everything is using that texture, just not unwrapped properly. The first selection that we need to concentrate on doing is the easiest, but first of all make sure you have this keep UV edit mode the same, so that basically it will mimic. So see, if you switch it off there are no selections, whereas if you have that switched on, it mimics all of our selections in the 3D window above. So with our shape ready to go, we're going to choose the easiest faces first, and I'm just going to remember to switch on our key display as well, so you can see what I'm pressing. So we want to make sure that we just have the back plate of the nameplate and then the shadow face. So we are going to right click our mouse, hold shift and right click our mouse on the back face, and we have those two faces selected. Then we hit the letter U for unwrap, and we're going to choose project from view, and this replicates what we have in front of us, and then we just need to look at manipulating these two shapes into the right size and place that we want them to be. If you press shift and space, we can get a full size preview of this. Now we have these two faces here that we are working on. So we want to take, first of all, the shadow face, and we'll take this up to the top, and you'll see if I zoom out it will allow you to go over the edges, which of course is no good for texture mapping. So come down to your UVs menu and tick constrain to image bounds. This will mean you cannot go over the edges anymore. So we want to come down to about here and then scale it up just so it more or less fills, and then G and Y just to move it vertically, and a bit G and X to the side. Now the same for our other one. Bring it up to the top a bit, and now scaling until it fits in widthways, like so. G, and move it into position just below. Okay, excellent. So shift and space. So now that we've come out from our UV editor panel, what we now need to do is we want to unwrap our text. So with the limit selection deselected, we'll press B, drag it all across our text with our left button held, then let go, then limit the selection and use shift to right click the two back faces away to leave us with just our text. Now what we want to do now is we're going to unwrap this and we will put this all in one section. So we'll use a smart unwrap feature which will basically pack everything in as much as we can into a tight space. So press U, choose Smart UV Project, leave the angle at 66 degrees and these two options ticked. An island margin of 0.001 will just put a slight space between each of the pieces, and press OK with your mouse. Now if we do Shift and Space, you'll see here what we have. So we will rotate by 180 degrees to get it the right way up, and we will drag it up towards the top with G and Y. And then we will scale it with the Y-axis just a little bit to pop it into here, so that we got this last bit here for our main outline of the plate. So that is all of that unwrapped into where we want it. So now we need to do the outer parts of the plate. So first of all, we're going to keep our limit selection visible, so draw a box around each end like this, right click again to deselect both of those, and now we're going to use Alt and Shift to add our edge loop, and then the same with our inside edge face loop rather, and there we have all of the faces just for the outside. Press Ctrl and 3. It's important that you are not in perspective mode, which you can see here, so you press 5 and it alternates. We don't want perspective mode, and we do U and unwrap project from view, and that gives us these faces here. So we want to pull this down to the bottom here, just zoom out a bit more, pull down towards the centre, scale it, but leave some space either side, and you will see why in a moment. So we have all of these faces, but we need these loops on the out and the inside to have texture as well, and at the moment they have nothing. So the way we do this is we press edge select mode, press A for all, then whilst we hold Alt we edge loop select, switch back to here. Now if you do scale on the X first, then scale on the Y, and that has stretched all those faces out visible. And we do the same on the inside. Now because these straight edges are deemed as the back face, press A to deselect all. If we do it on these beveled corner edges with Alt and right click, we get the edge loop for the inside of the plate. You see the four corners highlighted. So scale X, this time going down, and scale Y, going down again. And there you have the texture for it on the inside. So as we zoom out now, you can see that is all of our mesh unwrapped onto the texture sheet. Now what we need to do is we need to make an ambient occlusion bake. Now you might be asking, what is an ambient occlusion bake? It's a good question if you don't know. Basically the software will calculate where light will be darkened in corners, around edges, things like that, and this will add variation to our shape, so that at the moment when we look at it in textured mode it looks like plain black because that's what we made our texture. But once we do the ambient occlusion bake, you'll see the difference. So first of all we need to switch to World tab, make sure we have ambient occlusion ticked, distance of say 15, leave these settings the same. Now because we're doing a test bake initially, we're going to have a low number of samples like 4. Then switch to your render tab, which looks like a camera, scroll to the bottom where you have bake, expand this if it isn't already, select ambient occlusion. We want clear so that it starts from scratch, a margin of a pixel, which is just where it overlaps the edges of where we've selected, and I always use normalized so that it bakes full brightness and full darkness where required for then making into our texture. When that is done, you press bake and press shift and space, and you'll now see it's baking. It does the letter in front first, which is pure white, but in a moment you'll see as it gets to the sides it's now packed together. So nearly complete, and I'll zoom in and you'll see the disadvantage of a low number of samples. So this shows us that our unwrap has gone exactly to plan. Everything is on the texture sheet, so that's good. That's why we use low samples, because it's quick. But as you zoom in, just look at the noise it creates on a low number of samples. So we need to zoom back out, and just before we make any changes, there you can see. So now you get to see a nice preview of what it is like in the world. And what we are going to do now is I'm going to take a brief pause, and I'm going to up the number of samples that we are going to use. I'm going to use 15, and then this is going to be doing a lot of tricky calculating, so we will chop the video off here and we'll come back when I've got a nice high resolution texture bake for you to look at. And there we are, we're back. So this is our new texture bake with 15 samples, and you will see as I zoom in, buttery smooth, none of that grainy digital noise. So that is a good bake, and it's got all of our texture parts on it, so we're good to go. We want to now use this baked image in Photoshop so that we can turn this into a coloured texture. So I'm going to switch over to Photoshop and open the image. Then I'm going to remember that I have yet to save the image, so I'll pop back to Blender, open to save image as in our textures folder. I always use a target because I've had issues with the alpha channel on PNGs. And then I'm going to call this trial plate bake target, save the image, and then when we switch back to Photoshop, there it is, double click to open it. So this is our shadow bake in, and first job is we need to switch to the layers so that we can start to turn this into effect information that dyes our colour as required. So double click your layer, I'm going to call this bake, and change the blend mode to multiply. Okay, now press Ctrl Shift and N for a new layer. We're going to call this one colour, blending mode of normal. Okay, and then with the colour mode selected, what we're going to start working on is everything that we expect to be red. So that's going to be the back plate to the nameplate here. So just do a rectangular selection around here, and then we need to do a few series of rectangular boxes here, pressing Shift to add them to it, so that we have all the side letter faces, because these also get painted red on a nameplate. So just going to carry on making these selections and fine tune them till we've got them exactly how we need them. Now last but not least, we need the inside edge of our actual plate shape, and we're going to do this by selecting just over slightly in the white, and then we'll use our magic wand with contiguous on and anti-alias off, and we will deselect the white, and then we will realise that we are on the colour layer, which contains nothing, so we'll switch back a step, go to our bake layer and deselect white. So there we are, that's everything we want in our selection to be red. So we will now switch to our colour layer, get our deep red, use the fill bucket and click, and there you have it. As you can see, it uses the ambient occlusion bake shading to colorise your red realistically, even though we just used one plain colour. Now the next stage we're going to work on is, so we want to have this whole bottom section selected, but we will deselect the red. Oh, but it would help if we remembered to untick contiguous, so we'll deselect everything that's red, and this leaves us with what we want to flood in silver. And we got a little bit left over there, so just chop that off from the top. So choose a nice lightish grey for our silver, paint bucket again, and press flood, and that's filled. Last but not least is the shadow part of our texture, and this needs to be our first introduction to alpha channels. This will be as well, because at the moment everything's pure white, and what we use an alpha channel for is, for some materials it controls how reflective or shiny something is, and for others, like the train decal that we're going to use, it controls the opacity. So white is fully see-through, going through to black, which graduates it. So I'll draw a selection around here, and then we want to use our magic wand with contiguous ticked on, and we want to deselect the black, and we really want to keep remembering that we need to go onto the bake layer when we're dealing with selections on the bake layer. Apologies. So deselect the black on the bake layer, and that leaves us that shape there. We're going to copy this shape with Control and C, and then in Channels tab we're going to switch to channel Alpha Channel and paste it into there. Then we're going to go to invert, not invert the selection, we're going to go to Image Adjustments and invert, so that we have white right in the middle, which means it's going to be pure black shadow, and it fades out to the outside. So that's where you can see the shadow petering out there. And then we're just going to make sure that we do have full black on the edges in the alpha channel by just making a few small boxes, adding them together, and then we will use our paint bucket to do a black fill on that area. That's done. Switch back out to our RGB channel, and because we're using the alpha for opacity, it is opacity of a black shadow, so we're just going to right away on the colour layer flood fill this all black. And that's it, that's everything. You see here all of our colour. So now what we need to do is we need to select the red first, the silver first, and we need to set this to quite a high grey, and this will affect how reflective the silver parts of the nameplate are. Then if we switch to our colour again and choose red for our selection, and now we want a darker grey like we sort of have here, bring it down to around 50, paint bucket and fill it in there. So that now is our alpha channel done. We've got two colours for reflectiveness, one for opacity, put everything together. Now when I save it, I always save the PSD first, which it suggests, so that we can come back and do any modifications and adjustments later, and then also save the target, but this time take away bake out of the name, click compressed, just save on file size, and OK. And now before we leave Photoshop, there is one more texture that we need to make. Now this is because the reflectivity that Train Simulator uses is just cast onto a dummy placeholder texture, which we are going to make now. So we're going to click New and just make a small 32 pixel square texture that's blank. Just save this in our texture folder and call it dummy.tj. So now switching back to Blender, and what we're going to look at now is our materials, which is this panel which looks like a sort of a shield on a circle. Now we need 3 materials for our object. We need 1 for the decal, which is a shadow around the outside, 1 for everything that's painted red, the sides of the letter, the inside of the face, and then 1 for the silver stuff, which is shinier. So we're going to add 3 slots in, then make 3 new materials. I'm going to call the first one shade, or we're going to call it shade if I can remember how to type. Just give me a second. Second one called paint, and the other one metal. Okay, and I'm using the BRIAGE exporter. So what you need to do with this is you need to make sure that you have your shader for each material chosen. So we want train decal FX for the shade, and then we want train spec environment mask for both of the metal and the paint. So with paint selected, we want the intensity of the reflection to go down, then untick and set the first UV value. These are all things that you can tweak with and re-export your object, but I'm just doing some rough estimates. Then over to your metal texture. Now this needs to be more reflective, so we're just putting in settings that relate to that, and that is your basic materials setup. What they need next is for the texture. So what we're going to do is we're going to load in a texture, and we just do image and then choose replace image, because we're replacing the bake with the one which doesn't have bake in the file name, and click replace, and there you see our texture in place. And it's all how it will sort of look in the real world, except for the black, because that obviously is the shadow, and then the alpha channel gives us transparency, so this doesn't show up in Blender the same way as it would in TS. So now we need to give each material their textures and assign them to their correct faces. So switch to edit mode and make sure limit selection is on. Right click just the back shadow face and click assign, and that's the shade one assigned. Then we go to the paint, and what we want to do is we want to unlimit the selection, and then we want to do a box by pressing B, which is just outside of where all the red falls on the back face. Okay, now click limit selection, and we want all the front faces gone, so we're going to press B, and we're going to deselect by holding our mouse scroll wheel button, and that deselects everything that falls within the box, so we have everything red. So set that assigned to the paint texture. So now we want to press A to deselect all, and we're just going to switch to Control 3 for the front view, press B with our selection limit on for the front, and then deselect the back plate, and then Alt and Shift and right click, and that will select the outer edge loop as well, and then click assign this for the metal material. And then that is all of that done. So now when we right click, just double check that when you right click the faces, they go where you expect it to be. So yeah, we had that back plate was actually shown on shade, so we've just assigned it to paint, and then silver faces on the metal. So we're all done. So So what we next need to do using our textures is set up a texture for each of the materials. So one slot for the decal with the standard texture, then standard texture and a new texture with the dummy texture for the two train spec environment mask ones, and again for the metal texture number 1 and texture number 001 for the dummy. And that's all set up. So our materials, our texture are all done. So we'll save the project, and then what we want to do is export it. So we go to object mode, check it is selected, go on to our third tab for exporting, and if you scroll down you will see BRIAGE exporter. Here we can edit our path, and that's remembering it from a previous project. So what you do is press your folder, go up to where you are, which is in trial plate, be trialplate.igs, click accept, and now I'm going to press, when I've got selection visible for the exporting, yes, so hit export, it will confirm the file name for us, hit export, and it tells us how long that took and that the IGS has been exported successfully. So now we need to go into RWAce tool. Now this takes our textures and converts them into a format that is understood by the blueprint editor. So we're going to select multiple textures, dummy and trial plate, open, click next, and then click start, and it will convert our textures to ACE format, which is what blueprint editor wants. So finish, and double click on a blueprint editor. This is just my own custom folder on a messy desktop which allows me quick access. So source folder, I am in VP for Vulcan Productions, and then scroll down to trial plate, and you'll see we have trialplate.igs. So I will right click on that, click create scenery blueprint, leave it with the default file, but expand your render components. I want to untick shadows and shadow casting none, because on small objects it does not work very well. Everything else is set up correctly. So we press F8 for a preview of the exporter in the train sim environment within the blueprint editor. This will pick up in the bottom window, it will tell you what's happening, it'll also kick up any errors, and if you get to the end it gives you a little time for how long the export took, which we get there, and we will reload when it's back in. And so there you have it. This is the windowed preview of the TS world for our object that we have made, and this is a preview, so you can see here is our nameplate, and we just move it all into view and select away, and there you see it. So the object is made exactly as we need it to be. So all that remains once we're happy with all those settings is to switch back into the blueprint editor itself by closing this preview window, and when you've switched back to the blueprint editor, press F7, and that will export your object to the same folder structure within the assets. And then in the final tutorial I will show you how you go about placing this as a child object on your item of rolling stock.